Hello and welcome to Master Sitecore. My name is Martina, and in this video I'm going to be talking you through what I think is arguably one of the most difficult parts of building a Sitecore site, especially if you're new to Sitecore, and that's deciding how you should build it. How should you componentize your designs, what components will you end up with, and what data templates will you end up with. During this process you will be making decisions that are going to influence the entirety of your project. You're creating the base implementation, and you want to make sure that you get that right and have considered all eventualities. For the duration of this video, I'm going to be using a 3-page sample site for a dog charity, and we're going to be breaking that up into templates and components, which I'm going to be listing in a Word document, and you can download that below this video. So here's our site. It's a very simple site. You've got an index page, a list page, and a detail page. And on this index page, you have a banner, a little bit of navigation here at the top, a number of promotions that you can use for various things. And here is a list of the most recently added pets or most popular pets. It depends what you want to do with it, and we're going to have to find that out. We also have a list page. Here it is, pet list. Similar sort of look, again, the navigation here at the top, a list of pet detail pages, a bit of an introduction, and you see we've reused this promotion here on the right. And we also have, finally, a detail page where you get a large picture of the pet in question, a bit of a summary of who they are, and a couple of components here on the right-hand side. And again, we have this feature from the homepage repeated. So I have two jobs here. Number one, I need to figure out what my data templates are. So do I have more than three? Three seems obvious: homepage, list, and detail. But is there something else I'm missing, like a non-detail page, for instance? Or is the presence of another page suggested by this HTML that perhaps the person who built the HTML hasn't considered? One example would be if somebody lists a terms and conditions links here at the bottom but hasn't created a standard content page, then they have additional work to do, and you're adding an additional template to your estimates. So let's start by inferring data templates. Now, like I said, there are three quite obvious ones. We clearly have a detail page here. We clearly have a listing page, that's also a template, and we clearly also have a home page. Let's start with kind of the deepest nested page, which is the detail page. So on that template, I might have a title, an image at the very least, and some descriptive text. Now I'm wondering, where does this information come from? Well, this seems to be other detail pages, but featured in a different way. So that's their title, their image, and their text coming through. What about this content on the right-hand side? Well, here I'm starting to think, actually, I have more than 3 data templates, because this promotion I know has been repeated across multiple pages. So I'm going to decide that we need a non-page item called promotions that can be reused in different contexts. So that's my 4th template, this generic promotion, which also has a promotion title, text, and a link. Also on this page, and I know this has been used in other areas as well, I've got this bit of information here. Now, that phone number, and it says to adopt Alfie there, I'm wondering, does that belong to this item, to this data template? If so, I will keep that content on the detail page rather than having a separate non-page item called phone number or call to action or something like that. I will just keep that content here. But then when we go to this list page, there's a more generic one. So I'm thinking, okay, do I create 2? Do I have individual dogs storing their own phone number associated with their adoption, or should I have a kind of a list of available ones you can pick from? And if I need to choose which phone number to display here, then it needs to be an item in its own right. So as a precaution, I'm going to say, okay, we're going to have call to action templates as well. So this is a promotion bit of content, and this is a call to action bit of content. And that's going to have a phone number and a little bit of text there at the bottom. This list here is probably going to be generated again from the detail pages we saw, so that doesn't necessitate the creation of another data template. Let's go back to the index page. We've talked about the promotions, we've talked about this list. Haven't talked about the banner though, and a banner is something we might want to reuse on other pages. So I'm going to say that we need a banner data template with a title text and a link as well. So let's write out what we've got so far. We've got home, which is a page. We've got pet list, which is also a page, and pet detail, which is also a page. But then we have banner, which is a non-page item. We have a promotion, and we have this call to action, which features a phone number. Do we have any base templates? So particularly for pages, there's usually going to be a bunch of shared fields. Let's have a look. The homepage is a bit of a tricky one. It usually looks very different from all other pages, so it in all likelihood is not going to inherit anything apart from maybe metadata. So let's put that in. Page metadata, which is a base template. But if we look at the detail page and the list page, they both have title and some text, and it may be that in future you want the ability to put a summary image. Here we go, we have title, image, text. So let's do page content, which will also be a base template, and that'll have title, text, and main image. So we're not repeating ourselves. Finally, what about navigation? So are you going to be generating this navigation from the items in your Sitecore tree? That is an option, but it means you have to be very careful when adding new items to make sure ones you don't want to appear don't show up here. And also, if you have a very large site, you are asking this component to traverse a large tree just to get a small amount of information. So sometimes you might set up a navigation structure somewhere else in the tree. And if you're setting up a structure, you need templates. So I might actually end up having navigation items, which might have a title, or it might just be a link, or it might have an icon as well. I don't really know, but I'm going to add that in there because I know for a fact that I often build up navigation from items in the Sitecore tree in a global folder. Now, is there anything else? There is the logo here. If we want that to be content managed, it needs to be content managed somewhere. You may do that on your site root though, which means we don't need an additional template. Now there may be more templates that can be inferred from here, but already you can see from 3 data templates, or rather from 3 HTML templates, we have inferred rather more than 3 data templates in Sitecore. Now, it can be quite difficult at first to think like this. Like, let's go to the homepage, for instance. So you might look at that and think, well, there's a banner. So I make some banner fields on the homepage item itself. And there's 3 slots here. So I do slot 1, slot 2, slot 3. So I don't need a promotion item and a banner item. But of course, you have to think about some of Sitecore's experience marketing features, particularly personalization and testing. So if I want to personalize this banner so that it differs depending on who's visiting my site, it can't just be a field. It has to be a component with a data source, which means it needs to choose content from somewhere. So I need to be able to have 10, 15, 20, however many variations of this banner. And each of those variations is an item. The same goes for these components here. If I just have 1, 2, 3 slots for them, I'm not going to be able to vary the content depending on who the visitor is. They'll come in, they'll see just the text coming from the homepage. Whereas if I have an item, a donate item, an adopt item, and a volunteer item, I can have different variations of those. And I can start to customize what each individual visitor is seeing. Now you might find sometimes that it gets a little bit ridiculous. So look at this title, for instance. Should that be a field on the homepage? Well, you could argue that if I need to test it, so show a different sentence depending on who you are, then that actually needs to be a separate item as well. So that I can point this area of the page to item number 1, help us help them. Maybe item number 2 says volunteer your services. Item number 3 might say there are different ways that you can contact us or help us. So it can get a little bit insane. You just have to be acutely aware of what might be personalized and what might be tested, because it will affect which data templates you end up creating. You're always treading that fine line between going totally overboard and providing flexibility in the system. So that's data templates. And again, your process might be a bit different, but the point is that you are going to end up with a lot more data templates than HTML files. And it requires you to kind of think about how the system's going to be used. More often than not, I'll be asking the UX person, the designer, well, how is this going to be used? What is your expectation here? Because if they're expecting to be able to add 40 different components, you know, change what it says depending on who does what, that affects how you build. Okay, speaking of components, what components can we infer from this set of designs? And sometimes they'll match up to, or be very similar to the data templates you've decided to create. So for instance, I have a banner item whose content is being output here, and that's probably going to be done by a banner component. And I may want to reuse that component on multiple pages. So rather than hard coding it into home somehow, I would make that a reusable component that I can put anywhere. So that's one, banner. Two, promotion here. I might want to be able to add any number of promotions, and for it to go onto 2 lines, I may want to be able to change the height and width of them. So I'm going to have a promotion component that pulls out promotion data using a data source. What about this one? So this is a pet list. Now, there's nothing on here to really tell me what this does. Is this the latest pets added? Is this the most popular ones? Is this just a list alphabetically? Should there be any variation here? So does the content author want to be able to say output all elderly dogs, output all puppies? So at this early stage, I'm probably going to create a pet list component and then make sure I ask what functionality is required, because it may be that I need to create multiple versions of this. Maybe one is a pet list, maybe one is a featured pet list, maybe a list of the pets that have been most recently adopted. And you as a developer have to make the call as to whether you create separate components for all of those things, or perhaps you use personalization to make that happen, or maybe you use rendering parameters to make that happen. So when the content editor adds this component to the page, they get a little pop-up that says, what do you actually want to output? So already it's 1, 2, 3 components here that we've decided. This navigation bar, so we might have a header bar and a navigation bar, or just for ease, that single navigation bar. You might want to hard code that, you might not. So we've got 4 components now. Let's go on to the list page. We've got a breadcrumb here. We've got a title and some text. So I might want to make the title a completely separate component. We might want to make the breadcrumb a separate component. This bit of text, probably separate as well in case I want to move it. Here's a list component, which is, so each one of these wouldn't be separate. It would probably just be a single large list component. This is a promotion component that we've already talked about and will be reused. And then this is a call to action component that pulls in a phone number from somewhere. And there's nothing here at the bottom of the page. Let's look at the detail. This will probably reuse the text component, but an image will be used. So if you include an image, it'll appear. Again, we've already talked about the breadcrumb, we've talked about the title, we've talked about the call to action and promotion, and this is a reuse of what was on the home page. So let's write those down. We have a banner, promotion, call to action. We have featured pet list, and we need to ask whoever made the designs what that's actually supposed to output and if there needs to be flexibility. We have a breadcrumb, title, and we also have some body content. So that's the text and image, which is repeated again on this page over here. We have a pet list. And we have a header and a footer. Now what we've done here is we've kind of listed the functional components. So components that actually do something, like output a title or output a phone number. But there's another kind of variety of component to consider, and that's the scaffolding. So let's have a look at this page here. Now, if you are a front-end developer, you will know that around these components here, we have some HTML. It might be a row. I mean, this is Bootstrap, so it is a row. But from a backend developer's point of view, that becomes a component as well. So all it is, it's some HTML that you can put anywhere. So you might be able to move this strip of content above the banner, below this set of featured pets. So it's a component row, and I would probably call it a promotion row. And it means that I can maybe in future vary the color of this, but it gives me the flexibility to move this entire row of content. So these are each one individual component with a component kind of holding it around the page. And it also means I can reuse it. The same might go for this featured pet thing. It may be that the featured pet component is just this bit inside, and that this blue area is actually some kind of wrapper. Now this is where you're starting to make things a little bit complicated for the content author. So you as a backend developer, together with your UX team, should decide, is it worth doing all this work? Do I actually need these wrappers? Do I need that kind of flexibility? But if you do, you need to build it in. So far I've identified 2 wrapper components, one for promotions and one for this featured pet thing. Although you may decide, no, it's all going to be one component, which is also fine. Here on this page, and also the detail page, you see that we've split our page into 2 columns. Now, is that always going to be the case? We don't know. It may be that in future you have a single column, which pulls the content all the way to the right, or you might have 3 columns with left-hand navigation here. So even without seeing the designs, we can say, okay, I'm going to create a 2-column sub-layout or view rendering or whatever, with placeholders on the left and placeholders on the right, in case in future somebody says, do you know what, we need 3 columns now, and I want to change everything. So you're kind of future-proofing a little bit. So let's write those down as well. There's a 2-column component, and there may potentially be a promotions wrapper component, and there may also be a features dog component or wrapper component. Now the 2-column makes sense because you are changing between 2-column, 3-column potentially in the future. These are a bit much. And I personally think it can be quite confusing for a content author to have to add a wrapper before they can add the promotions. So you just have to think, how technically advanced are your content authors? Do they need this feature? Will they be able to pick up on it? Or is it just going to make it difficult for them to use Sitecore? Now, at every point as I've been going through the templates and components we need, I've had 2 things in my head. And that's some of the experience editor features, namely personalization and component testing. Those are the 2 key things that you as a developer are supporting when you are building in Sitecore, because this is where you can have the most effect. I mean, goals and analytics, they're just going to work as long as you have pages and you've configured goals, that'll work. But you can really have an impact on how well the experience editor works. Because you might do too many static components, you might not take advantage of data sources, which are crucial to being able to test and personalize. So you might want to do a final sweep and think, can I test and personalize all the parts of the site that need to be tested and personalized? Let's go and have a look. So we start with the detail page. Now, the only part of this page that uses a data source would be this part here on that part at the top. It's a promotions component that pulls in a promotions item, a call to action component that calls in a call to action item. If that's using a data source, which is likely to, because it's pulling in stuff in from a separate item, a completely separate item, I will be able to personalize it and I will be able to test it because I can vary the data source based on some logic. Do I need to be able to personalize the title? If yes, that, unless you do a full page test or a full page well, I don't think you can actually do full page personalization. That needs to point to a data source as well. Same with this text here. And that can get a little bit awkward because a content author would probably expect to be able to click and just start editing, not to have to choose a data source in order to be able to change their title. So you have to think, am I impacting the usability? Am I going to gain anything from this? And this list component here is just going to work on its own. It's going to go and pull out all the child items underneath this list. So I'm happy that these 2 can be personalized and tested. Let's have a look at the detail page. similar sort of story there. I know that these two can be personalized and tested because they are components that point to an item, and this content is unlikely to need to be personalized. But again, if I wanted to test different ways of phrasing this title, that would need to be a separate title component that points to a title data source, which can seem a bit insane. What about the homepage? I'm happy that I can personalize and test all of these components here because they are a component that point to a data source. And I'm happy that I can personalize and test this component here because it's a banner component that points to a banner data source. And then we get to this one. You might want to personalize this. So you might want to say, if the visitor has shown an interest in older dogs previously, then show them older dogs. If the visitor has shown an interest in puppies, then show them puppies. If this needs to be personalized, it needs to point to, or needs to be able to point to a separate data source. And it may be that the data source for this component is the root item for the category. So the puppies category, the elderly dogs category, or the mongrel category. So I would need to go back to my stakeholders and say, what are you expecting from this component? Are you expecting to be able to personalize? And sometimes you'll find that you've given them a bright idea and earned yourself a little bit more work, but that's okay. You're making use of testing and personalization. Now, this is by all means not the only way to do this process. You might actually be more granular or less, but it gives you some idea, if you're new to Sitecore, of the thought processes that need to go on. At all times, you need to make sure that you are supporting personalization and supporting testing, supporting inline editing and the ability to move components around, and make sure that the expectations of your stakeholders, of the people that you're going to use your system, are met. Because you as a developer can really make or break projects in how you implement it. Sitecore's key selling point is that you are able to do all this inline editing and that you're able to put the system to work for you after you've left your desk. And it is important that you highlight those features and make it as easy as possible for them to be used. That's all from me. You can find me on Twitter at @MHWelander, and thank you for listening.